6 months ago, I found out I was pregnant. My boyfriend left the same week, saying he wasn't cut out for family life. I'd be lying if I said it didn't gut me, but I didn't have time to fall apart. I called my older brother Ethan. He's always been the one who shows up, paid my college deposit when mom's savings fell short, handled the funeral arrangements when dad died, even drove 6 hours to tow my junker car back home when it broke down mid-road trip. So when I asked him to be the baby's godfather, to just be there like he's always been, I didn't expect silence. He stared at the ceiling for a full minute before saying, "I'm not babysitting. Ask Jake or Luke." For context, Jake and Luke are our younger brothers. They're good people, but they're 22 and 24, still figuring out how to adult. Ethan's 31, stable, owns his apartment, has a 401k. He's the reason we kept the house after Dad's heart attack. But when I reminded him of the promise he made to Dad, "Look out for them, okay?" he snapped, said parenting wasn't part of the deal. Mom tried to mediate. She's working part-time at a library now. Her hand's always a little shaky from the arthritis meds. But Ethan wasn't having it. Told her she was guilt-tripping him into roles he never wanted. I didn't get it. This was the same guy who taught me to parallel park, who stayed up with me all night when I had mono sophomore year. Then I overheard him talking to Jake in the garage a few days later. "She's repeating Mom's mistakes," he said, "trapping a man who doesn't want kids." I confronted him. "You think I wanted this?" My voice cracked, and I hated that it did. He didn't flinch, just said I was romanticizing his past help, that he's done being the family fixer. Meanwhile, Jake and Luke promised to babysit, but admitted they're both moving to Texas and Oregon for jobs in a few months. Mom started coughing more, stress probably, and her part-time paycheck doesn't cover her rent. I've been paying the difference from my receptionist salary, which now needs to stretch to diapers and a crib. Ethan ghosted me for 3 weeks. No calls, no texts. I left a voicemail asking for closure before the baby comes, but nothing. Then, while helping Mom clean her attic, I found Dad's old letters. He'd written them during his last year when the heart failure got bad. One was addressed to Ethan. "If I don't make it, you'll have to be the man I couldn't." I took it to his apartment, my hands trembling, hoping it'd remind him who he used to be. He refused to read it, said Dad's regrets weren't his burden. But I noticed the photo on his desk, us as kids, him holding my handlebars as I wobbled on my first bike. "I'm scared I'll fail my son like Dad failed us," I told him. He wouldn't look up from his laptop, but he muttered, "You're nothing like him." I walked home crying, wondering if that was a compliment or a condemnation. Mom said he called her later asking for Dad's old therapist's name. She didn't give it to him. Privacy, she said. But I could tell it shook her. The next morning, I woke up to a $2,000 Venmo from Ethan. The note just said baby stuff. No call, no text. I stared at the screen, equal parts relieved and furious. It felt like a payoff, not support. Like he was buying his way out of caring. But rent's due next week, and the glucose test came back borderline, so I deposited it. Here's where I stand. Ethan's the only one in this family with real resources. He's not wrong that I'm leaning on him harder than I should. But he made a promise to Dad, to me, and now it feels like he's rewriting history to duck out of it. Mom says he's dealing with his own stuff, but isn't everyone. I'm about to be a single parent. I can't afford to be the bigger person, but part of me wonders if I turned him into a hero when he never asked to be one. That photo on his desk, the way he still sends Mom money for her meds even when they're not speaking. Maybe he's just tired of being the glue. Maybe sending cash is the only way he knows how to say "I'm here" without losing himself. I don't know. All I know is my son's due in 8 weeks and the bassinet's still in a box on the floor. Ethan hasn't called, but he hasn't blocked my number either. I keep staring at that Venmo receipt, wondering if it's an apology or a goodbye. So Reddit, am I the asshole for expecting him to step up? Or is he the asshole for leaving me stranded when he's the only one who's ever stayed? Now for the first update. 3 weeks since my last post. A lot of you told me to cut Ethan some slack, that grief makes people weird. I tried, but between Mom's health and my boss side-eyeing my swollen ankles, slack isn't a luxury I've got. Let me start with the $2,000. I deposited it. Didn't thank him. It sat in my account like a blinking neon sign. See? I helped. But money's not the same as showing up. I bought a secondhand crib, the kind that converts to a toddler bed, because I'm already thinking 5 years ahead. Assembled it myself at 3 a.m., crying when the screws didn't line up. Mom won't admit it, but her coughs turned wet and phlegmy. She hides used tissues in her sleeves now. Ran into Ethan at Safeway last Tuesday. I was squinting at formula prices, trying to do the math per ounce, when I felt someone behind me. Didn't have to look. His cart had that same squeaky wheel from when we used to shop for Dad's low-sodium soups. He grabbed a case of baby wipes, the fancy bamboo ones I'd bookmarked online but couldn't justify. Dropped it into my cart without a word. Practicing for Uncle Duty, I said, aiming for light, landing somewhere between desperate and bitter. He froze. For a second, I thought he'd actually say something. Then his jaw did that twitchy thing, the one he gets when Mom mentions Dad's anniversary. "Don't push it," he muttered, walking away. The wipes stayed. I didn't realize until checkout they were the exact brand I'd wanted. The cashier rang them up, and I had this stupid urge to tell her. "My brother bought these," he remembers. "Mom's been worse. Her doctor mentioned possible fibrosis and follow-up tests, but she won't skip work. Found out Ethan's her emergency contact. Not me." "He's better in crises," she said, shrugging. I wanted to scream. Since when is my brother her safety net? "Stop updating him," I told her. "If he wants to know, he can ask me." She just folded her laundry, slow and deliberate. "He's trying, honey, in his way." Trying looks like this. A bassinet showed up at my door last week. No note, but the shipping label had his office address. Texted him, "Thank you." He replied 3 hours later, "It's just logistics. You needed it." Logistics, right? Jake called yesterday. Ethan's been weird on their weekly Zoom chats. Like, he asked if I'd taken my car in for an oil change. Since when does he care about my oil? Since never. Ethan's idea of brotherly bonding used to be handing us a wrench and saying, "Figure it out." Then Mom's landlord threatened eviction. Again. Her rent's gone up twice this year and my receptionist paycheck can't cover the gap anymore. Swallowed my pride, called Ethan. Voicemail. Tried again. He picked up on the fourth ring, breathing heavy, like he'd been running. "I need a loan," I said. No hello. Silence. Then a sigh. "How much?" $5,000. I'll pay you back." The Venmo notification hit before I'd even hung up. No note this time. Met him at his office to sign a repayment plan. My idea, not his. He scrawled "no interest" at the top, shoved the paper back at me. Up close, he looked rough. Dark circles, coffee stain on his collar. His coworker waved at me on the way out. "Tell your brother to stop picking up Saturday shifts," she said, laughing. "He's making the rest of us look bad." Double shifts. For Mom? For me? For the bassinet he pretends he didn't research? Ultrasound yesterday. Doctor said the baby's breech. My blood pressure's spiking. "Bed rest," she said, like it's that simple. My boss adjusted my hours, cut them in half. When I called Mom to tell her, she coughed so hard I heard her fumble the phone. So here I am, 8 months pregnant, lying on a couch that smells like Dad's old cigars, counting the cracks in the ceiling. Ethan's money is in my account, but his number's still silent. I keep thinking about that night in his apartment when I begged him to read Dad's letter, the way his hands shook when he refused. Maybe you're right, Reddit. Maybe he's grieving. Or maybe he's just a coward, throwing cash at problems so he doesn't have to feel them. But here's the thing no one tells you about being this kind of tired. It strips you bare. I don't have the energy to hate him. Not when every kick reminds me this kid's gonna need more than I can give. The bassinet's still in the box. I'm scared if I open it, I'll jinx something. Or worse, I'll have to admit Ethan's still in here with me, in every unread note, every unwiped tear. 3 weeks to my due date, Mom's coughing, Ethan's working, and I'm just here, waiting for the other shoe to drop. Or maybe, if we're lucky, to finally land. Now for the second update. 3 weeks since my last update. A lot can change in a month when you're 9 months pregnant, your mom's on the brink of eviction, and your brother's idea of communication is Venmoing you money like some guilt-driven ATM. Let's start with the check. The $5,000 loan Ethan gave me for Mom's rent. I'd been scrimping every spare dollar, eating peanut butter straight from the jar to save on groceries. Managed to scrape together $300. Wrote him a check, left it in his mailbox with a note. First payment, more soon. Figured he'd cash it quietly, no fuss. Should have known better. Mom's birthday dinner. She wanted pizza and a Redbox movie, but I'd baked a cake, the kind with frosting from a can, because that's all I could afford. Ethan showed up late, reeking of coffee and printer toner. Handed Mom an envelope. "New inhaler," he said, like it was a grocery receipt, not a lifeline. She started crying immediately, which set off her cough. I was clearing plates when Ethan pulled the crumpled check from his pocket. "What's this?" He didn't yell. His voice was ice calm, the way Dad's got right before he'd slam doors. "I told you I'd pay you back." He ripped it in half, not dramatically, like a movie villain, just methodical, 2 neat tears. "I'm not a loan shark." Mom sobbed harder, wheezing between words. "Why can't you two just—" Ethan left before she finished. Didn't wait for cake, didn't say goodbye, but he'd brought the inhaler. Later, Mom let slip he'd been paying her medical bills since January, secretly. "Didn't want you stressing," she said, like hiding thousands in debt was a favor. I called him, furious. "You think I'm a child who can't handle the truth? You've got enough on your plate," he said. Flat, final. I hung up, threw my phone across the room. It hit the bassinet he'd bought, the one I still hadn't assembled. Then the contractions started. Not Braxton Hicks. The real thing, 2 weeks early. Called Jake. Voicemail. Luke sent Uber money but couldn't get a flight. The driver kept glancing at me in the rear view, probably wondering if he'd need to pull over for a roadside delivery. Ethan was there when I got to the hospital. Don't know who called him. He stood in the waiting room, holding a stuffed bear with the price tag still on. Looked like he'd slept in his clothes. "You don't have to stay," I said, gripping the wheelchair. He didn't answer, just sat down, bear on his lap, and stared at the Weather Channel on mute. 8 hours later, Daniel was here. 6 pounds, 3 ounces, with my chin and his dad's stubborn lungs. The nurses kept saying how alert he was, eyes wide like he'd already seen the mess he'd been born into. Ethan left before I could introduce them. No note, no text. But when I got home, the fridge was stuffed with freezer meals, real ones, not the dollar pizza I'd been surviving on. A post-it on the milk, "Mom's staying with me until you recover." Mom confessed he'd deep cleaned his guest room, bought her a humidifier, hired some home nurse she'd absolutely not needed. I pictured him Googling COPD care at 2 a.m., jaw clenched, like it was a hostile takeover. First night alone with Daniel, I broke. He wouldn't stop screaming. I was sobbing, shirt stained with milk, and whatever dignity I had left. I looked out the window and saw Ethan's car idling across the street. He came upstairs when I texted help. Didn't ask questions. Just took Daniel stiff-armed like holding a live grenade. I passed out for 3 hours. Woke to find him on the couch, Daniel asleep on his chest. Ethan's face was, I don't know, haunted? Awestruck? Never seen him look at anything that softly, not even Mom. He smiled, Ethan whispered. "Gas," I said. "Nah, dimples, like yours." We didn't talk about it. He started texting. "Just need anything?" On Sundays. I'd reply, "Coffee or diapers," and they'd appear on the porch. Once I caught him researching sleep schedules on his phone. He snapped it shut, face red. "You're allowed to care, you know," I said. He grunted, tossed me a bag of onesies. They were buy one, get one. Liar. They were organic cotton, the kind that doesn't irritate eczema. Daniel's skin's been sensitive since day one. Last week, I tried inviting him for coffee. Real coffee, not a porch drop-off. He declined. But that night, he stayed 2 hours, letting Daniel grip his finger while I showered. Didn't speak. Just sat there, studying the baby like he was trying to decode something. Found Mom crying yesterday. Showed me a text from Ethan. "Is she eating enough?" "He's trying," she said. "I know." "Then why does it hurt?" I didn't have an answer. Maybe because love's a messy thing when it comes from someone who's broken the same way you are. Ethan's not the hero. He's not the villain. He's just a guy who pays bills and buys organic onesies and rips up checks because accepting help feels like failure. Daniel's starting to recognize his voice. Turns his head when Ethan mutters, "Hey, buddy." Progress isn't a bassinet or a fridge full of food. It's a man who's spent his life running from being needed, sitting perfectly still so a baby can fist his thumb. I don't know if we're okay, but we're here. And for now, that's enough. Now for the final update. 3 weeks since my last update. If you told me then that my brother would be sitting on my couch at 3 a.m. with a baby spit-up stain on his shoulder, I'd have laughed until I peed, which at 9 months pregnant wasn't that hard. Let's start with the girlfriend. Ethan's, not mine. Never met her, but I knew she existed. A faint citrus perfume on his jacket, the way he'd check his phone during Sunday dinners and grimace. I found out she left him the same day he showed up at my door with a Costco-sized box of diapers. His eyes were bloodshot. The collar of his shirt stretched sideways like he'd yanked it trying to breathe. "Don't ask," he said, thrusting the diapers at me. I didn't. Just handed him Daniel, who was mid-scream, face purple from teething. Ethan froze, arms rigid, like I'd passed him a live wire. But then Daniel's tiny fist grabbed Ethan's thumb and something cracked. Not literally, just his face. A flicker of softness around the eyes, there and gone. He stayed for 3 hours, didn't talk, didn't move from the rocking chair, just stared at Daniel like he was trying to memorize the slope of his nose. When I took the baby back, Ethan's shirt was damp with drool. He left without a word, but the next day, a brand new rocking glider appeared on my porch. Secondhand, but sanded down and restained. Ethan's a shitty talker, but he's good with his hands. Mom says he's been different since the breakup. Quieter. Shows up to her place every Sunday with groceries, stays to fix leaky faucets or recaulk the tub. She thinks the girlfriend gave him an ultimatum, her or us. I don't know. All I know is he started joining us for dinners, always arriving late with a 6-pack of formula and avoiding eye contact when I say thanks. Found Dad's letters in Ethan's car last month. I'd borrowed it to take Daniel to a checkup. Mine was buried under a snowbank. They were tucked in the glove box, edges frayed, Dad's messy cursive screaming from the pages. Ethan had highlighted a line, "Protect them, but let them grow." I didn't mention it, just slid them back under the owner's manual. But that night, I caught him in the nursery, Daniel asleep on his chest, reading the letters under the nightlight's glow. He didn't look up when I hovered in the doorway, just kept turning pages, his thumb rubbing circles on Daniel's back. Christmas was weird. Ethan gave Daniel a savings bond. For college, he muttered, like it was a tax document, not a gift. But then he spent 2 hours under my sink, fixing a leak while Mom and I baked cookies. I offered him a plate. He took one bite, said, "Too much cinnamon," and left. But the next morning, there was a new coffee maker on the counter, the kind with a timer, because he knows I never sleep past 5 a.m. anymore. Mom showed me his text last week. "Tell her I'm proud and I'm sorry." "Tell me yourself," I said when he dropped off diapers. He pretended not to hear, just nodded at Daniel's onesie, the one with ducks, his current favorite, and said needs a bigger size. But then there was the job. I'd been applying for anything. Retail, data entry, whatever let me work from home. Got rejected 8 times. Ethan found my resume on the kitchen table, coffee stained and tear smudged. Didn't say a word, just took a photo with his phone. 2 days later, he slid a printed copy across the table. Red ink everywhere, bullet points added, verbs sharpened. "You undersell yourself," he said, like it was a critique of my laundry skills. I got the job, full-time, benefits, the works. When I told him, he just nodded. Then that Saturday, he drove me to Dad's grave. Never asked, just said, "Get in the car." We hadn't been there since the funeral. The headstone was mossy, Dad's name half buried in dead leaves. Ethan crouched, brushed it clean with his sleeve. "He'd want to know," he said. "Know what?" "That you're okay." I wasn't. Not really. But standing there, watching Ethan press his palm to the stone like he was checking for a heartbeat, I realized none of us are. We're all just faking it, hoping the other person doesn't notice. Daniel started crying in his car seat. Ethan scooped him up before I could move. Did the awkward bounce walk he's perfected, all stiff knees and muttered curses. Daniel grabbed his finger, wouldn't let go. "Okay, buddy," Ethan said, voice splintering. "I'm here." He comes over every morning now, brings coffee, steals a piece of toast, and lets Daniel gum his car keys while I shower. Still won't call himself uncle. But last week, he taught the kid to fist bump. Found him on the floor yesterday, Daniel giggling as Ethan made a toy truck crash into a stack of blocks. Not playing, exactly, more like engineering demolition. But when Daniel squealed, Ethan's mouth twitched, almost a smile. The bike showed up last night, tiny, red, handlebars polished. Ethan left it on the porch with a note. "For when he's ready, I'll teach him." I texted thanks. He replied, "It's used." But I know he stripped it down, repainted it, replaced the training wheels, saw the grease under his nails at dinner. Mom says he's seeing a therapist now. I don't ask. Just notice the way he pauses sometimes mid-sentence, like he's rewinding old words before they spill out. We don't talk about Dad, or the letters, or why Ethan still won't look me in the eye when he says goodbye. But he shows up, every damn day. And maybe that's all we get. Not closure, not some grand redemption, just a man in a coffee-stained shirt doing his best to outrun the ghosts he's carried for decades. Daniel's starting to say F fan. It's the closest he's got to Ethan. My brother doesn't smile when he hears it, but he buys a bigger box of blocks the next day. Progress, I guess.